Hello, BookTube. This is Alan. It's Friday the 17th. This is going to be a longer video than my previous one because I have a tag here that I've been tagged by Sean Standfast. And if you haven't been following his channel, it's very, very good. He even made the poetry section of his books that he collects in his permanent collection interesting, and I don't like poetry at all, and I watched every single one of them. It is also my one of my brother's birthday. I live with my three older brothers, and this one is closest to me in age. He's 2 years older than I am. So this is the nonfiction book tag Nosy edition. A list of 10 questions, I believe. Um, yes, 10 questions, so let's get started here. Question number 1. What subject or area of nonfiction did you begin with? Was it history, biography, sociology, anthropology, art, math? Was there a specific event, person, or book that sets you on your path? The answer to this question is it was religion. And in specific, it was missions. I watched an old movie with Spencer Tracy called Standing in Livingston. And it was about Henry Stanley was sent by a New York newspaper to go find David Livingstone, who was presumed to be dead. So he goes to Africa in search of this great missionary explorer, David Livingstone. And throughout the movie, there was this, towards the end of the movie, there was this Christian hymn called Onward Christian Soldiers, which is amazing. It was a very, very good book because the famous quote that Henry Stanley gives Dr. Livingstone, I presume, and that was in the movie, and also in the not in the movie was, was another question that David Livingstone had was, you were lost. Everybody was looking for you, and Dr. Livingstone said, "Well, I'm not lost. I'm here doing God's work." So let's go on to question number 2. Where did you get your first books from, or define your new passion? Was it borrowed from your friends, family, or purchasing? Do you have any guidance from anyone? Well, my area of interest is missions, and when I was younger, say about my teen years, I went to the library and church library, and also to the local library, and looked for books specifically on missions and about missionaries. And I read about David Livingstone through also, of course, pictures, a lot of pictures, and David Livingstone and William Carey, who went to India and was told by the British mission field at that time that if God wanted to convert the heathen, he would do it himself without you. And yeah, and so I read books like that, and later on I read an excellent book by, I can't remember the author's name, but it was called From Jerusalem to Jira, and it talked about the global expanse of mission field, and it had St. Patrick, Adirondack Judson, Hudson Taylor, who actually went into China, and Hudson Taylor was told by the British Mission Field Society, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. Had a lot of restrictions on him And so Hudson Taylor started his own mission board. And Hudson Taylor also went, because he was told not to go into China, go inside, in a rich, in a part of China, just stay on the outskirts of China. And so Hudson Taylor adopted a formal dress of the Chinese, and he went into the interior. Later, when China became communist and forced missionaries out, the board that he founded was China Inland Missions, became known as Overseas Missionary Fellowship, and they went to Taiwan, Japan, Philippines, Korea, and other areas in the Asian region. And also they had here in Dallas, they had a regional office, and I would go visit that regional office a lot of times and read more books about missions and mission field, and biographies, autobiographies of missions and then I would, and then I was getting ahead of myself in this tag, and also I went to various missions conference, Urbana, Illinois. Used to be in Champaign, Urbana, and they moved it to St. Louis, and it's been going on for a long time. And I think it's every 3 years, every 4 years. I'm not sure. And yeah, they had people there, different speakers. Helen Rosenbeer, who went as a missionary to Africa, and Elizabeth Elliot, whose husband Jim Elliot was killed by the Auca Indians in South America, which is interesting because I read an article in the New York Times which talked about the this lost tribes, and that nobody else speaks the language. And this one person they met was in South America, and the only thing he had that had someone else speaking his language was a record that had the Gospel of John on it, and that was a descendant from the Auca Indians. That Elizabeth Elliot, the husband of Jim Elliot, her and Nate Sade's widow went to and converted the Auca Indians. So that was very interesting. There was an Adoniram Judson who was a missionary to India. His wife died, and he actually dug a grave and just slept next to his wife because he was so depressed. And then you have the Cambridge Seven, who are all of a sudden have this big revival at Cambridge, England, and they all went to the mission field. And of course, Eric Little, who was became famous from the movie Chariots of Fire. He went to China and was put into a prison camp by the Japanese and occupied China. Let's go on. Question 3: is your first love? It's hard to read this. I'm sorry. It's still the love of your nonfiction reading life, or has it been a gateway to subjects that took over as number one? Well, reading biographies and autobiographies and memoirs of missionaries has led me to read about missionaries and to read about biographies and autobiographies and memoirs of other people as I had shown on this channel, The Storm is Still, and Francois René de Chateaubriand. And it was memoirs about other people who were not missionaries. Even though Francois de René Chateaubriand wrote a book called The Genius of Christianity. And so that, and so it doesn't mean that. Oh, there's one thing I'm going to point out is that during the Soviet Union, I met this missionary who was in the Soviet Union who had this thing where we could write letters to people in kind of like the gulags and Russian prison camps in the Soviet Union. And so I learned how to write the Russian language down. And he would take them to go to Russia and send them off there. And that's how I got my interest in Russia. Question 4. Did you pursue any of your interests with formal education or at the university level? If so, what did you... can't make it that word. I wrote it down. I can't make it out. Sorry. What did you finish, and was the experience you had help, hope for, expected? Have you made it your profession? No, I haven't made it my profession. I have an associate's degree in liberal arts. When I went to the universities, I've been to several of them, like 4 of them, and didn't really put down what I major. But every time I went to a library in the university, I went straight to the history section and read about biographies and memoirs and autobiographies and about different cultures. And then also I took some classes at the seminary because there was a lot of restrictions placed on the missions and missionaries. A lot of restrictions. They said you have to have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and all these other degrees. And then they came out with said, well, just because you have a THM doesn't mean you can be a missionary. And so I actually came up with one in which I wanted to teach English as a second language in Japan, for example, or into China. And I told that to my pastor at the church I attended, because he had a school that he just started at the church. And he goes, well, no, we don't do that here. So, question 5. If you have had it entertain your first interest all your life, the fact that you should pursue other interested subjects. Sorry, I write real small, very small. It's hard for me to see a lot of times, and I can't understand what I just wrote. Should I have pursued other? Yeah, I should have pursued other interests, because in school I majored in photography, computer science. I majored in history, and that was a good one. So I was just actually going for jobs that paid a lot of money, basically, and you don't do that. You don't do that when you're going to school. You go for what you love, not for what it pays. Because when you get out and get into the job, you're not going to like the job. Number 6. Are you now a specialist and read only one type of nonfiction, or do you branch out and read uh, other genres? Or do you read something for light, something light or different? Yes, I read light a lot. I've been reading it a lot more than biographies and memoirs or history. I read a lot of more, um, probably a combination of fiction and nonfiction. More fiction this year. Question 7. You can uh, um, something about specialize or not. Do you prefer academic studies, um, works or scholarly eras, or sorry, scholarly works but not over academic? I read a lot of university presses. I read Foreign Affairs magazine, which is very academic, scholarly, and different essays on foreign policy. I read a lot of about classical music, which I'm interested in. I also read the Dallas Theological Seminary magazine, which is the Biblioteca Sacra, which just basically it's a sacred text of the Bible. And they have questions like, well, they use a Hebrew verb, and they asked a question. Somebody wrote an article where that Hebrew verb said this in this particular passage in the scriptures. To a lot of other people that wouldn't make any sense, but to me it does. Question 8, I believe. Do you collect books in the area of interest, or do you read or sell, borrow books from the library, paperback or hardback? Read first editions, uh, library copies, or underlining. So there's a lot of questions here in that one question. The answer is no, not just in my area of interest, which it's actually started out as missions and it branched out into history and biography and memoirs, and then it went to is general fiction, contemporary fiction, thrillers, horrors, and so yeah, I branched out a lot. And first editions, I was very interested in first editions a lot, especially Stephen King novels. I thought that was great, to have a first edition. Stephen King is amazing, and now I don't care if it's the first edition or not. It doesn't bother me. Library copies. I have a lot of library copies because the library, main public library here in Dallas, had a book sale, and I went and bought the books, and a lot of them have the little Dewey Decimal System that's on the spine of the book. It's still there, and it says Dallas Public Library across here, the front. So, and those are hard to get off. Underlining. I used to underline in yellow highlighter, and no, I don't. And no, I actually, if I don't have a marker or pen with me, I actually dog-eared the book, and then later on undog-eared it and do some this is a post-it note. Put it on there. I don't carry these with me. I should put these in my bag and carry them with me. It'd be easier to do. Where are we? Oh, question 9. sorry, this is, I think it says news publications collect exclusively newer publications. Sorry, do you enjoy reading? I have to say about the past. What is the oldest book you have? The original or a reprint? A couple of oldest ones. The one I've already shown was The Mill and the Floss by George Eliot, 1908. I have a couple of others that are about the same period that I've shown on this channel, 1908 and 1900. It's probably about the oldest ones I have. Oh, I have, see if I can see it here at the moment. No, I don't. I don't see it at the moment. I thought I had it right here on my bookshelf, and I don't. And it's a book. It was from before 1900. It was a work from a Scottish Puritan preacher called The Forgiveness of Sins and Other Sermons. I forgot the author's name. Excuse me. What's the most you ever paid for a book in your main area of interest? Well, it wasn't in my main area of interest, because my main area of interest is the history and biography, and so the most I've ever paid for a book was $125 for a Stephen King book, and it's Under the Dome, which was signed, autographed, first edition, and I purchased it online on eBay, and so apparently, because I was surprised that I got the book, that I won the betting, because it was Stephen King in his first edition. It was autographed, and I was surprised about the price. But then I've heard a lot of people, Stephen King aficionados, who said that was the worst book they've ever read by Stephen King. And so yeah, it's in one of the great tabs, and I kept it, keep it in, and I don't know what I'm going to do with that. I've never read it. So anyway, that's the nonfiction book tag, Nosy edition. I'd like to thank Sean Steadfast for tagging me. Hope I got all the questions correctly. And I need to write larger. I don't have a printer, so I can't print it out, and I can look at my phone to look at the questions, because I use the phone to do these videos. So, well, thank you very much, BookTube, and like I said, have a good weekend.